it was pretty tough mentally going to the gym. I'll be honest. It was very tough going to the gym, getting weaker on a daily basis, not being able to lift the same amount of weight I was able to do the week before, and certainly not the weight that I was able to do on cycle. Welcome to Vigorous Health. I'm Coach Steve. This is part 4. I think we're already at part 4 of the post-cycle therapy and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease video series. So I'm here to give you guys another update. For the guys that don't know, about 4.5 months ago, beginning October 2020, I was diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in stage 1. There's several stages. So stage 1 is early non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And honestly, I don't want to progress that any further. So I decided to come off cycle in an attempt to resolve this issue. So I did a post-cycle therapy that is now pretty much completed. So what I'll do is I'll separate the PCT from the NAFLD and discuss the entire post-cycle therapy here in this video, give you guys an update. And then tomorrow I'll release a separate video regarding the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Now, the PCT is pretty much completed and resolved, but the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, based on the triple opinions that I got from 3 different doctors, it's about 40 to 50% resolved. So that's still ongoing, but I'll update you guys about that tomorrow. In this video, I want to discuss the post-cycle therapy only because it's probably already going to be, over 30 minutes or maybe 20 minutes, so I'll separate it and update you guys about the liver status tomorrow. So the post-cycle therapy, it's pretty much over. I feel that I've recovered my hypothalamic pituitary testes axis as best as I could, considering that I'm 37 years old at the moment. Started performance-enhancing drugs at the age of 26 with a total testosterone of around 650 nanograms per deciliter. And as of this weekend, as of Valentine's Day 2021, my total testosterone is 515 nanograms per deciliter. So that's about 135 nanograms per deciliter reduction over the last 10 years. So I think that's pretty much related due to age. I'm recording this at my desk right now, so it's a little bit easier to go over the blood work because I want to go over all the blood work that I, performed over the last couple of months. And it's a little bit easier than going over my phone and scrolling and going in between all the blood works that I took. So here we are at my desk recording for you guys. So right now we're at 550 nanograms per deciliter. I feel I'm pretty much recovered, and there doesn't have to be another update regarding the post-cycle therapy because I'm pretty much successful in what I did over the last 4.5 months. So those are actually pretty good levels, especially considering I was blasting and cruising for about 10 years in total. This was my 3rd cycle that I just finished. So I did my first cycle around 26 for about 16 weeks. Then I did PCT, traveled the world, did another cycle of 6 months, did a PCT, and then I blasted and cruised for 8 years in total. So I was able to recover from that, even though it was a pretty lengthy PCT involving the clearance of all the performance-enhancing drugs I was running previously. That took about 6 weeks. Then I did ACG for 2 weeks, Nolvadex and Clomid for 4 weeks. And then I came off, and now that's been about 6 weeks ago I came off completely of all the performance-enhancing drugs, even though I did run a Turkesterone experiment in the meantime. So we'll go over all of that a little bit later. Now, I also got the blood work results of my father, who is 65 years old, and his total testosterone is about 473 nanograms per deciliter. But his results were performed in a different measuring units, namely nanomoles per liter. So his results were 16.4 nanomoles per liter, which is very good for a 65-year-old man, considering he doesn't put everything into place that you would otherwise expect for a guy that's health conscious and focuses on his micronutrients. So that's actually pretty good reading, and it gives me hope going into the future that I would be able to sustain my total testosterone concentrations, if I were to stay off anabolic steroids in the future, which will probably not be the case. At one point, I would like to go back on cycle because, this is not really enjoyable, this diminishing muscle mass that's going on right now. Even though when I throw up a front double bicep, it still looks good, But as I sit here with deflated shoulders and reclining traps, yeah, it's not really that enjoyable. So I gave bodybuilding a break for the last 2 weeks, and I will continue to give bodybuilding a complete break going forward to resolve the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So I will not be training, and I will keep this testosterone, this little amount of total testosterone that I have in my bloodstream, for my organs, and not use that for recovery for bodybuilding. Because honestly, the last 4.5 months, training-wise, have been pretty much ass. You know, really, it has not been enjoyable at all. So let's go back all the way to the beginning, to a time when training was still enjoyable. Actually, it's not the beginning. It's the end of my 3rd cycle that lasted 8 years in duration. Let's go back to the end of August 2020, when training was highly enjoyable because I was still on cycle and I had no diagnosed non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, even though it's still an underlying health condition, because my liver enzymes were chronically elevated for approximately 2 years. So, at that time, my total testosterone was around 1,350 nanograms per deciliter on a biweekly injection protocol. I think I injected about 2 days before the administration, so that's 125 milligrams of testosterone Monday and Friday. Doing my blood work on Sunday, so that's 2 days after a 125 milligrams test E injection. Now, the day after, I would expect a total testosterone of around 15 to 1600 nanograms per deciliter, but it declines pretty rapidly. That's why, more frequent injections are advised if you're trying to optimize your serum concentrations, whether that's the testosterone or the estradiol. But considering I was running, 200 milligrams of Primo on top, 100 milligrams with my testosterone injection Monday and Friday, my estradiol came back around 39 picograms or picograms. What is it, guys? Picograms or picograms? I know you guys correct me sometimes in the comment section, so I'll try to remember that it's picograms from now on. Picograms per milliliter. Around 39, 40 picograms per milliliter. Now, as you see, Primo is giving a decent amount of aromatizing inhibiting effect. So it acts as an aromatase inhibitor by itself. So I was not using any aromacin, Arimidex, letrozole, but I was still running diethylmethane and calcium diglucarate at that time. So I took that out after seeing this blood work. So I'm sure it increased a little bit after taking the diethylmethane and the calcium diglucarate out. But a few months later, I didn't do any hormone panel in the meantime. So a few months later, I came off cycle. So I'm not exactly sure where my estradiol was at that time, right before I came off cycle. But I'm assuming it increased a little bit. Let's say, top of the reference range, 45 picograms per milliliter. Now, as a result of being on Primo and having, top of the reference range, albeit slightly reduced estradiol levels, you would otherwise expect on being on 250 milligrams testosterone by itself. My sexual binding globulin was only 14 nanomoles per liter, which is still okay for sex drive and anabolism, but not ideal. Ideally, I'd see that around 20 nanomoles per liter, 25, 30. So before adding in the Primo, I was around 25 nanomoles per liter, and then the Primo decreased the sexual binding globulin to 14 nanomoles per liter. So that's the last blood work panel regarding the hormones that I had on cycle. As you clearly see, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are completely bottomed out, and that's completely to be expected. Now, let's move on to, the 8th of November, a month after being diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and letting my hormones levels decline. So that's about 4 to 5 weeks later after stopping all injections. You see that the follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone is still low, but already coming up a little bit. So let's say I went from 13 to 1500 nanograms per deciliter on my total testosterone to 171 nanograms per deciliter. Yeah, I didn't feel too good, I'll say that, but I still felt anabolic. Honestly, I was still training pretty hard at that time. So that's, 5 weeks later after my last injection, I was still on growth hormone. I hear clenbuterol here and there as a little bit of an anabolic incentive to keep the gain train. It's not really going, right? The gain train is maintaining. Still reasonably strong. I lost a little bit of strength, but training was still enjoyable. So I kept going at that time, even though my total testosterone was 171. Free testosterone was below the reference range, and bioavailable testosterone was also below the reference range. But you see that my sex hormone binding globulin increased. And yeah, sex drive, obviously, with this high sex hormone binding globulin and low total testosterone, even though my estradiol also came down to 13 picograms per milliliter. So you see the entire hormone panel is low, and the sex hormone binding globulin is reasonably high for the amount of sex hormones that are in my body. So needless to say, sex drive was, kind of wishy-washy. It was still good, as was my energy in the gym, but it was certainly not optimal. So at that time, I started my ACG at 2000 IUs every other day. I did that for 2 weeks. And then somewhere at the end of November, where you see my beta ACG is, nicely over the reference range. And beta ACG is actually a tumor marker. So if you have, pituitary adenoma, you might be able to expect beta ACG to be that high. That's why for men, ACG is a tumor marker, because even though it's bioidentical in men, it's only found in trace amounts. Your hypothalamic pituitary testis axis and hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis works on luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, not an ACG, even though ACG is able to sustain or give you comparable effects regarding HPAA and HPTA, even though it's actually the TA part of this equation, or the AA part of this equation. So after 2 weeks of ACG, my ACG is obviously elevated. Actually, I wanted to check my ACG, inject 2000 IUs right before going to the blood work clinic for analysis, but I forgot that. So that's actually lingering ACG from 2 days before, when I did my previous and my last ACG administration of 1000 or 2000 IUs. Sorry. So there's still some lingering ACG in my system. I have no idea what the beta ACG would have gotten up to if I were to inject 2000 IUs, let's say 1 hour, 2 hours before doing the blood work subcutaneously. Now you see that my estradiol recovered from, 13 picograms per milliliter to 25 picograms per milliliter. So that's double. The follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone increased again a little bit. So it's still subclinical below the reference range. And the total testosterone went up from 171. Actually, this is 3 weeks later, right? Yeah, right. So when I saw the previous results, my total testosterone was 171 nanograms per deciliter. I decided to wait another week, let that come down a little bit more to ensure that the last testosterone enanthate injection has cleared the most amount, and the Primo enanthate injection has cleared the most amount possible. So there's no negative feedback on the HPTA and the HPAA when I was to start post-cycle therapy with ACG. So I waited another week. So 3 weeks in between 171 on my total testosterone, letting that decline to, let's say, 100, maybe 50 nanograms per deciliter. Before I started the ACG, I felt pretty miserable. I also felt miserable after seeing 171 on my total testosterone, obviously. You feel good until you see the blood work results. That's usually how it goes with bodybuilding. So 3 weeks later, total testosterone, 651 nanograms per deciliter, which was great. When I saw that, I was really, really happy, because I knew that the ACG could potentially, or that my testicles were still able to produce a significant amount of total testosterone and estradiol and, everything in between. So when I saw that, I felt, okay, great. This post-cycle therapy is going well. Free testosterone came up to 10.7 nanograms per deciliter. And the bioavailable testosterone came up to 285 nanograms per deciliter, probably because my albumin was not really high. So even though my sex hormone binding globulin went up, because my albumin levels were in the middle of the range, my bioavailable testosterone came out over the reference range. Again, it's all a moment in time. So maybe it's only for 1 day throughout this entire PCT. But hey, you go by the numbers and make adjustments based on that. Now, at this point in time, I decided to start Nolvadex and Clomid, 100 milligrams of Clomid per day. and 40 milligrams of Nolvadex per day, tapering that down over the course of 4 weeks. And after 4 weeks, I ended up with an estradiol of 32.1 picograms per milliliter. It's embedded, these pronunciations. I'm trying to do my best to keep up with you guys. Estradiol came up a little bit more, 32.1 picograms per milliliter. FSH and LH also came up, albeit, slightly at the bottom of the reference range to around 3 IUs per milliliter. Testosterone went down to 460 nanograms per deciliter. Free testosterone came down, bioavailable testosterone came down, and sex hormone binding globulin came up to 63 nanomoles per liter, which is pretty much over the reference range for men. Ideally, you'd like to see that around 25 to 30 on cycle and no higher than 40 off cycle. But this is the cruel joke of nature. Your testosterone goes up, and most of that is going to be in the sex hormone binding globulin because, estradiol around the middle top of the reference range is, of course, producing the most amount of sex hormone binding globulin you can get at that moment in time, given that testosterone is able to decline that. So, middle of the range, testosterone, top of the reference range, estradiol, means pretty much top of the reference range or over the reference range, sex hormone binding globulin. So by this time, libido, double thumbs down. And my energy in the gym, double thumbs down. Really, I was still training at the time, but, every time I would go to the gym, the energy would not be as good as the previous week. And basically from workout to workout, I felt my energy and my strength declining. That was at the end of the year. I was still training, still going to the gym, just going through the motions, not getting a pump, not enjoying myself, and clinging on to the last little bit of identifiable bodybuilding that was still left in me. All right, so that was at the end of the post-cycle therapy. I considered myself, that the post-cycle therapy was successful. And new data that was coming out that turkesterone was non-suppressive. I saw that on my wife's blood work and on the blood work of many of the Gorilla Mind athletes that ran turkesterone. Derek did a very comprehensive video about that. So I decided I'm the most HTPA fragile man, and it's a perfect time to test if turkesterone is really suppressive or not. So I ran 200 milligrams of turkesterone per day, that being 4 tablets of the turkesterone extract that Derek manufactures. And after 4 weeks of that experiment, I was also using growth hormone at the same time. I was running growth hormone the entire way through. I think by this time I stopped using clenbuterol. I stopped using GW1516 because by the time I finished the post-cycle therapy, considering that I had to increase my calories to make post-cycle therapy successful, I gained some body fat, probably also because, the training intensity was not really there. I was still doing 30 minutes of daily fasted cardio every day. I didn't miss a beat, but my caloric intake was so high that I gained body fat in the process. So, being HTPA fragile, going on this turkesterone experiment, continuing with the comparable caloric intake, my total testosterone came back a little bit lower from 460 nanograms per deciliter to 440 nanograms per deciliter. I already made a separate video about these blood work results, mine and my wife's blood work results, so I'll link that up here so don't sound repetitive for my loyal audience who already watched me analyze my blood work results between the before and after turkesterone experiment. So testosterone came down a little bit. Estradiol came down a little bit, so that's probably because my testosterone came down. The follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone came up a little bit, so that's good news. More evidence that turkesterone is not suppressive. And sex hormone binding globulin also came down a little bit because estradiol came down a little bit, so that's probably all related. So I would consider that a moment in time, just normal HTPA functioning, pulsing the luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone as the estradiol and testosterone levels are going up and down. So that's just a normal moment in time. After this, at the end of January, being 2 weeks, pretty much 2 weeks ago, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go off everything, which is a scary idea as a bodybuilder who's been on some sort of supplementation, some sort of performance enhancing drugs. for decades. Really, for decades. So I came off the growth hormone, I came off the turkesterone, I came off the multivitamin, the zinc, the selenium, the carnitine. Now take supplements to keep my micronutrient intake optimal on top of my diet. I came off every form of tablet or injectable. I just ate food. And I followed a ketogenic diet that I designed a couple years ago that has 100% of the daily recommended intakes, or what is it called? The dietary reference intakes for micronutrients. So I followed that ketogenic diet. So I basically stayed on top of my micronutrients through food intake and food intake alone. And after 2 weeks of that and no extra supplementation or performance enhancing drugs, my testosterone came up to 514, 515 nanograms per deciliter. Again, I would just consider that a moment in time. Follicle stimulating hormone came down a little bit. I think, no, follicle stimulating hormone came up, but luteinizing hormone came down. So again, it's just a moment in time. More evidence that I didn't need all those supplements, to have normal testosterone production, considering I'm 37 and I just came off a cycle of 8 years in duration. So I pretty much consider myself recovered. Now in this blood work, you see that my estradiol is unreadable. I honestly have no idea why. Unfortunately, I did not check my sex hormone binding globulin with this panel, which I should have. Now that I see this estradiol this low, that it would be a good indication to see if my sex hormone binding globulin declined astronomically with this low estradiol levels, because of course estradiol is the one that contributes to sex hormone binding globulin production the most out of all the hormones that contribute to SHBG concentrations, whether that's a decline or an increase. Now, it was not on Nolvadex, not on Clomid, not on anything else during this last 2 weeks. So I'll have to go with lipid concentrations, which we can now compare because I did check my lipids before this 2-week experiment of nothing unnatural, nothing supplemental, nothing performance enhancing. So unfortunately, we only have the lipids to go by in an assessment to see if this estradiol is accurate or not. And keep in mind, guys, this is a chemical luminescent immunoassay examination on my estradiol concentration. It's not a liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry test, so it's not as accurate. I already called the lab to confirm, is that unreadable estradiol correct? They said it was correct, but I don't think so, because when you look at my lipids from 2 weeks ago at the end of January 2021, my total cholesterol was 162 milligrams per deciliter, triglycerides 60 milligrams per deciliter, HDL 64 milligrams per deciliter, and LDL 85 milligrams per deciliter. Now that's on supplementation. So at that time I was taking 10 milligrams of ezetimibe or ezetimibe, however you pronounce it, 1000 milligrams of citrus bergamot. Now my diet model hasn't changed. I was eating 5 whole eggs for that sweet cholesterol for testosterone production, because yes, a little bit of dietary cholesterol contributes to that, but I'm pretty much sure 100% that ezetimibe or ezetimibe is preventing cholesterol absorption from the dietary eggs, from the dietary cholesterol sources. So you see that my cholesterol is, nice in the reference range, HDL is high, LDL is low. Looks like a very good lipid profile considering I was on supplementation. Now my diet model hasn't changed. My estradiol might have changed. So after taking the citrus bergamot and the ezetimibe out and all the other supplements which could potentially contribute to a skewed or optimized lipid levels, total cholesterol came up to 204 milligrams per deciliter, which is, 2% out of the reference range. I don't think that's remarkable considering I'm eating 5 whole eggs per day. So that purely comes from taking the ezetimibe and citrus bergamot out. Triglycerides, 50 milligrams per deciliter. That's pretty much the same. Nothing to remark there. HDL came up. HDL came up to 70 milligrams per deciliter. But LDL also came up to 115 milligrams per deciliter. So let's say that's almost a 10% increase in the HDL and a pretty substantial increase of what? I'll have to guesstimate 25? 30 increase in the LDL. So from 85 to 115 milligrams per deciliter. So that's the true indication of a lipid panel based on my dietary intake of, around 100 grams of fat per day, of that being 5 whole eggs per day. I was eating beef. On top of that, some salmon. So, a decent amount of extra cholesterol. Let's say I was eating 1,500 milligrams of dietary cholesterol per day. Now, based on these readings, considering my HDL is pretty high, I would not say that my total or my estradiol is that low. It's not unreadable. I don't think it's below 10 picograms per milliliter. I would just say that that's a false reading, and I'm not going to take any action based on this reading because I looked through all my supplementation, literally all of it, which took me 2 days. That's why this video is a little bit late. I went through all the supplementation and I consulted with the most knowledgeable guys in the fitness industry. Are there any supplements out there that can give you a false positive on your estradiol readings, considering I was not taking diindolylmethane, which might contribute to high or low estradiol, high estradiol if you're overdoing the diindolylmethane. And I can't find anything. I don't think it's a turkesterone suddenly dropping my estradiol, considering that my HDL is still pretty high, and that goes down pretty fast if the estradiol is down that low. My libido is exactly the same. It's still double thumbs down, but, acceptable. Still getting the job done. So it's not like my libido crashed into, the zeros and undetectable, unreadable, just like my estradiol is. So I'm just assuming that this is a incorrect measurement, being a chemiluminescent immunoassay. So I'm not going to make any adjustments going forward. I already started my regular supplementation protocol. I added in the growth hormone again because I do like growth hormone, 1.2 units 2 times per day for overall anti-aging, well-being, sleep quality, and, a little bit of volumization of the little bit of muscle that I have left. So that pretty much covers the estradiol and my lipid levels. I don't think I need to incorporate any sort of lipid management, considering that my cholesterol is slightly over the reference range. And again, I stopped training. So I reduced my activity levels for the last 2 weeks. So I didn't go to the gym. I didn't train. I didn't do any bodybuilding. Honestly, it's not very enjoyable. So let's address that now. Being on cycle, I'm sure you guys can all attest to this. Training is absolutely legendary. Legendary. And this is the reason why most guys don't come off. And when they do come off, a lot of guys simply don't go to the gym, as I'm doing right now. Going from a major high to having your strength decline to the point you get no pump and you're basically at 80%. Some exercises 50%, guys, 50% of my previous strength, and I'm in a caloric surplus. 50% of my previous strength, it's not really enjoyable to go to the gym. So what I plan to do in my attempt to resolve the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which I will get into more depth when I address that video after recording this video, which I will release tomorrow. What I will do is I'll just let my bodybuilding decline to absolutely zero, which I've done in the past when I traveled for a year. For the guys that don't know. I did my first cycle, did my PCT, recovered just fine. And on the day I started traveling, I still did like a little bit of push-ups and sit-ups in, the hotel rooms. But after a couple months, I was like, why bother? I'm traveling the world in these amazing Asian countries, but my protein intake, my food intake is unmanageable because I'm eating out, street food, basically. So I decided to stop training. I ended up being 74 kilos skinny fat by the time I came back home after 50 weeks of traveling. So that's almost 1 year. And within 2 months, I was 92 kilos, pretty big again. Dropped a decent amount of body fat in the meantime. So I'm not worried. I'm not concerned. I'm not, scared to stop bodybuilding and stop training altogether. I already bought an elliptical because I was not able to keep my heart rate up on the treadmill, even though I was walking at 6% incline at 5.5 kilometers per hour. So that's pretty steep, but my heart rate was just slowly going down. And I noticed that during the workouts, even though my strength was going down and I really tried to keep up the pace in the gym, my heart rate is, my cardiovascular endurance was not that good anymore. So I bought an elliptical that's already installed, and I will go to town on that elliptical from the next few weeks or maybe even months going forward to work on my cardiovascular endurance and keep that going, because I do like, training. I do like to get winded. I do like to break a sweat, but training in the gym right now, I'm just going to let it decline. And by the time it's, completely bottomed out, the strength is not there and the muscle is probably not there either, even though I'm still 95 kilos at this point. So, pretty much 15, maybe 20 kilos over my natural potential at a comparable body fat percentage. I would say I'm about 15% now. Maybe you guys would say 20, but hey, it is what it is. So let's say I'm 15 to 20 kilos over my natural potential. And like I mentioned in some videos before, when you do come off cycle and you stop training, you'll hold on to a decent amount of muscle mass, especially if you use growth hormone. You got a decent amount of hyperplasia in the meantime that you were on cycle. Some of that muscle maintains, but it's not really that, cosmetically pleasing. So that's what's going on right now. The shoulders are deflated. The traps are deflated. The glutes are deflated. There's no, pop to the muscle unless I flex, and then it still looks somewhat decent, albeit not as big as it was before. So I'm just going to give put bodybuilding on the back burner and focus on my cardiovascular endurance, because honestly, training is really not enjoyable and it feels like a struggle, which is mostly mental. So let's discuss the mental aspect of doing a post-cycle therapy before we wrap up this video. So in my case, I didn't need to do a post-cycle therapy. In most cases, it's recommended just to go to hormone replacement when you're diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And in hindsight, maybe that was a mistake because, again, my non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is not resolved just quite yet. We're only halfway there. But for me, because I don't need testosterone medically, I was at 650 nanograms per deciliter, and now I'm, 10 years later, I'm at 550 nanograms per deciliter on my total testosterone. I don't need testosterone medically. And when I take anabolic androgenic steroids or any kind of performance enhancing drugs, I want to bodybuild. Besides the growth hormone, which you can take for anti-aging purposes, you don't need to train to take growth hormone, in my opinion. Trying to, somehow justify me being on a little bit of growth hormone at the moment, even though I'm not training. And in an attempt to resolve the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, I wanted to put bodybuilding on the back burner and come off steroids. Now, the mentality of that is that training enjoyment went from an all-time high before I was running, 450 milligrams of combined anabolics, 2 units of growth hormone, and a couple of units of Lantus per day, in a caloric surplus because I was trying to gain size. I ended up at 115 kilos, even though I was on a ketogenic diet. So that's pretty substantial. That's 255 pounds for the guys in another measuring system. So that's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy, especially considering it was only on 450 milligrams of anabolics per week. All-time strongest, coming off cycle, partially forced, partially self-decided, trying to keep this training intensity going, but it was only going down. Getting less strong, less amount of reps, less strong, less pump, to the point we are now where I don't even feel like training anymore. But on the opposite side, by putting bodybuilding on the back burner, my business, as you guys have seen, my subscriber count has increased. I'm able to keep up, or most of the time I'm able to keep up with this daily upload schedule. I don't feel as fatigued during the day as I did before because I would train in the morning, balls to the wall, no excuses, as much weight as I could stomach for the best possible reps, considering I'm training here without air conditioning and 80% humidity. I think that's pretty good, considering it's not my climate. And I don't think anybody outtrains me at the Muscle Factory. Well, now they do. Now they do, obviously. But back then, when I was training my socks off, nobody was outtraining me. Nobody. Really. And as a result, I felt that throughout the day. Because I would come home exhausted, tired AF. And I would need 2 hours just to get back to work. And of course, like intelligent work, I would still do work. Handle emails, respond to clients, just keep them going. Maybe look at the stock exchange, that kind of stuff. Do some sort of other business venture. But it would take a few hours before I was ready to record videos, or a few hours before I was ready to write ebooks, really put my mind into it and produce some high quality content for you guys. And after putting bodybuilding on the back burner and not training that intensely anymore because, total testosterone was not that high and a little bit of growth hormone and a Clomid GW1516 that I was running was not able to sustain this training intensity whatsoever. So by, reducing the training intensity, I was able to focus more on work. Now, instead of, being cognitive and absolutely sharp on point for part of the day, I'm cognitive and on point for most of the day. And now that I stopped training for the last 2 weeks, cognition, focus, and productivity is at an all-time high. So again, I'm not taking any hormones. And while I'm not taking any hormones anymore, I'm probably not even going to train and focus on my cardiovascular endurance with the elliptical. Now, the mentality of that is that I feel absolutely great. My mood is at an all-time high. I'm not really sure if the mood reduction came from the anabolic steroids or training that intensely, where you always feel a little bit tired and lethargic and, and you bring all this energy and aggression and frustration, that you bundle up during the day and then you release at the gym. That's how I would train. I would always train with some raw emotion, not an exact thought. It was present, focusing on the reps and getting the best possible contraction. But I would not think about any, traumatic moment in my, life and use that as fuel for the workout. I would just use the raw emotion to fuel the workout. And now that I'm no longer doing that, honestly, guys, I'm more at peace. My mood is way better. My wife is reminding me every day, you're so nice, you're so friendly, your mood is so better. When something happens, a small mishap that would otherwise set you off, it no longer sets you off. You just laugh and you go about your business. When I was on cycle and even before then, I was always quite irritable, about the smallest thing. Like this air conditioning, for example, is rattling. It still pisses me off, but it's not pissing me off as much as it did before. So even though the bodybuilding is completely, basically gone right now. I'm not doing anything that you would otherwise expect from a bodybuilder and going to the gym and, eating a mountain of food and taking, perhaps performance enhancing drugs, even though some are not willing to admit that, but I was. I would say my quality of life has increased. And that makes the decision-making process going forward very, very difficult. Very difficult because productivity is high. My business is high. My relationship is better. By not bodybuilding. And I love bodybuilding, man. I love it. I love bodybuilding. I've been doing it for over 20 years. So I'm going to take a break from it, go on a little bodybuilding vacation, which I feel is warranted after 10 years of, doing cycling and enhanced bodybuilding. So the first 11 years was drug-free. I did my cycle. I went on a bodybuilding vacation by traveling the world or Asia for a year. And then we came to the second phase of bodybuilding being, predominantly enhanced. And now we are right here at this moment in time, my second bodybuilding vacation. Actually, no, that's not true. I had another vacation from bodybuilding when I broke my leg in a motorcycle accident. But that was a forced vacation, not a, self-decided vacation. The first self-decided vacation from bodybuilding came when I traveled the world. And right now I'm taking a self-decided vacation from bodybuilding to focus on my business. And, be the best possible husband I can be. So I hope I don't bore you guys with my declining shoulders that are slowly disappearing. At one point, I will get back to bodybuilding because, again, guys, I love it. I love bodybuilding. I will try to do my best to keep it as healthy as possible after my non-alcoholic fatty liver disease has been resolved. Maybe go on cycle. Let's do some drug-free bodybuilding first because, declining strength, disappearing muscle, I can get most of the strength or part of the strength and the muscle back without performance-enhancing drugs. And when I plateau on this 550 nanograms per deciliter, let's say 500, I'm hovering around 500, 400, 500 the last couple of weeks. Let's say when I max out on my... No, I can't say natural potential, right? Because I used PEDs in the past and clearly I'm 15 to 20 kilos over my true natural potential, drug-free potential. So let's say I reach a point where I feel I can't progress any further. I would consider hormone replacement and, the stack that I discussed in that How to Look Youthful on Performance Enhancing Drugs video. And I think that pretty much concludes it. So yeah, my quality of life has improved, even though bodybuilding is no longer part of the picture temporarily. It was pretty tough mentally going to the gym. I'll be honest. It was very tough going to the gym, getting weaker on a daily basis, not being able to lift the same amount of weight I was able to do the week before, and certainly not the weight that I was able to do on cycle. Let's say my weight went down by 80%, and my strength went down by about 80% as well. Some exercises even 50%, and that was a very hard pill to swallow, to the point I don't even feel like going to the gym anymore. But I'm not really, sad or butthurt about it, because again, my business and quality of life is so much better right now. And I'll leave it right there because this video has already been going way too long. So I'll record the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease update video after this. Thank you guys so much for watching. Vigorous crew, somewhat front double bicep for you guys. You guys are awesome. Thank you for all your support. If you're looking for the most comprehensive guides to bodybuilding pharmacology, you can find those ebooks on my website, VigorousSteve.com/shop. I have a very in-depth PCT ebook available for purchase as well, which describes everything that I did for my post-cycle therapy, which was pretty much successful, as you can see. The key here is letting your hormones decline. Don't start your post-cycle therapy after your last injection from one day to the next. It doesn't work that way. You need to let your hormones decline, and it may take a couple weeks. I listed all the detection times and the active life of every performance-enhancing drugs that is anabolic and has some sort of suppressive effect on your HTPA in the post-cycle therapy ebook. So whether that's 18 months on nandrolone, that's the metabolites. It might, you might be able to do PCT after 12 weeks of your last nandrolone injection. But again, maybe some of the metabolites are suppressive, so it might be warranted to do 18 months of hormone replacement or other cycles which are not so suppressive, like testosterone and Primo, for example, which should clear out reasonably fast within a couple of weeks. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Follow me on Instagram at VigorousSteve. Much love. See you guys in the next video.